said, a plane has hit the trade center, but it's a small plane, don't worry, he's on his way out. He just wanted you to know that he loves you and loves the children. He basically started talking about the fact that he knew he was going to die and it was going to be soon. Essentially what all these stories reveal is what we've always known, that even across the life-death divide, love does not waver.
Hello everybody, a warm welcome to Wisdom from North. My name is Janica and I'm now in Connecticut on my Wisdom from North tour around the US. And I'm sitting next to the author Bonnie McEneaney. She has written the book, let's see, this is in Norwegian, I can take it in English, Messages, Signs, Visits, Premonitions from Loved Ones Lost on 9/11. Now, Bonnie was a corporate executive and was somewhat skeptical of the notion of the afterlife. But in the summer of 2001, her beloved husband, Eamon, started giving signals that he knew he was going to die. And on September 11th, he did die. But after that, she received signs of him existing in another place and in another realm, if you will. And this led her to start talking to other people who also had lost their beloveds, and she found a lot of similar stories. So she has collected these stories in this book, and we will talk about that today. Now, Bonnie, much welcome to Wisdom from North, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled. This is great.
Yeah, and this is such a powerful story, and I was also in New York and I saw it all happen, and it's amazing for me to come to be able to connect with you because I think these are important messages in a way, because there are a lot of people who are losing people, and you have now experienced that there are signs that life does continue.
I think a couple of things. First of all, as you said, I didn't believe in any of this kind of thing. And like many people, you have to experience things for yourself to become a believer. But what's most important, what I've learned through the journey of interviewing so many individuals, many of whom are part of this book, is that it's very difficult when you lose a loved one to be told, you know, get yourself together, do what you can just to move on. You know, let's find closure. The English word closure really has no meaning in many languages, because how do you just all of a sudden change your direction, say, okay, this person has passed on who I loved, you know, very deeply, and not experience extreme sadness or difficulty trying to overcome, you know, the feelings that you have. The one thing that I found that was the most helpful to the people that I've spoken to is that when they actually had an experience that led them to believe that perhaps their loved one was still with them, they were still connected, it was the most therapeutic thing of any type of therapy that they'd been exposed to. And I think it's something that people should not be afraid to talk about and think about in their own lives.
So tell me, how did you first notice that your husband knew something that you didn't?
It was pretty straightforward. He basically started talking about the fact that he knew he was going to die and it was going to be soon, and he would make comments to me about things that I needed to take care of, etc. And actually, I thought that he was just experiencing some form of depression. So I became quite worried, especially the week before 9/11, when, you know, it seemed like every other night he was talking more profoundly about the fact that he really didn't think he was going to be here much longer. So, you know, at the time I was worried, really just about his state of mind. But, you know, of course, reflecting back, he was having what we know as a premonition.
Yeah, and there was an incident where you were watching television, wasn't it? And you saw Normandy?
Yeah, well, he basically, he was talking about, I think it was the Sunday before the Tuesday. So that would have been September 9th. It was the premiere of Steven Spielberg's Band of Brothers, wonderful miniseries about World War II. And this was the episode where these young boys from Company E were diving out of their planes into Normandy, parachuting down, and obviously were very young and very frightened. And Eamon turned to me and he said, they must have been so afraid because many of them were only 17 years old. But I want you to know that I can handle my death now. And at that point, I thought, oh my God, what is going on? And then, Monday came and Tuesday came.
But did you question when he talked like that?
Basically, I asked him, what's going on with you? And he really didn't know. He just felt these feelings and had these thoughts. It was extremely confusing for the both of us. I was just increasingly more concerned about what was happening to him.
And apparently a lot of people that did die had experienced the same, or people are saying that the people who died did talk about these things.
Yeah, there were many people that I interviewed. Ruth McCourt, who was on United Airlines 175, she died with her 4-year-old daughter, Juliana. She, a week before, was at a funeral and she had given a eulogy for one of her friends. And she was standing with the group, and actually one of her close friends, who was also on a different flight on 9/11, was with her that day. And she said, I felt, or I feel that something is going to happen, something very disturbing is going to happen. And the people who were with her, and actually each of the individuals was on a different flight, just coincidentally, they all shared this feeling. So, that you could say, well, somebody might be afraid to fly or whatever, but this is different because there was a pattern. It was one of the themes that I saw fairly consistently across the individuals that I spoke to.
And it seems to me from your book that also people who lost others knew that they were going to die, like they had premonitions, or like I don't remember who, but a wife just knew that her husband was going to die before her. And so it seems like when people were very connected in a way.
Well, this is all about love. There is nothing stronger than the bond of love. And essentially what all these stories reveal is what we've always known, that even across the life-death divide, love does not waver. You remain connected. Now, the reality is most people think you remain connected because you're always thinking about the person that you lost. You're deeply saddened. But what all of these people have realized is that they are literally connected to the person that they lost because of the bond of love. And they might not be able to see them, but that they're there. They know, they sense their presence. They have experienced signs. They have, had experiences in general that have led them to believe that there'll always be some sort of connection with that person.
So what happened on 9/11? How did he leave you in the morning, for instance?
Well, that was also, it was also very sort of startling because many months prior to 9/11, my husband had also been in the 1993 bombing and had come down 105 flights of stairs in the thick smoke and had some issues with, just breathing out smoke for quite a while. He had just some health issues as a result. Nothing serious, but there was a point where he developed a vertigo problem. And I think it had something to do with that experience because it was not too long afterwards where one night he just had the room was spinning, and some people call it, physicians know it as called Meniere's disease, and it's really a label for symptoms. So he had this difficulty trying to orient himself to the room, and literally was crawling on the floor, feeling sick to his stomach. Well, anyway, he had another attack a few months later like that, and then periodically he would get these dizzy attacks, and he sort of nicknamed them the whirlies, and it was very difficult for him when he had this problem. But he hadn't had an attack for over 9 months. And the morning of 9/11, he got up like he usually did at 5 o'clock in the morning, because he always took an early train. And he got into the shower, and I heard the water. And then all of a sudden, I heard him turn the water off. And he yelled out, "Oh my God, I've got the whirlies." And I said to him, "Well, don't go in." Because we had this routine where he got up and got dressed, and then he went, and then I would get dressed and go to work. And so he came out, and he said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Just don't go in. Just call and just, relax." And he thought about it, and then he thought that, yes, he could go in, and that's sort of the rest of the story. But I wonder, what was that? Was that another message? Was that another clue that, or something, some force trying to keep him from going? I don't know. But it was extremely unusual for him to have this. So it's a manifestation and a symptom of the stress he was feeling, that he would suddenly have this attack. And the stress goes back to this sentiment about, these thoughts, related to potentially not being alive much longer.
Yeah. Was that the last time you heard from him, or?
It was just a bizarre, surreal morning, because I was a little bit late going in, and I was driving my car and on the highway, and I thought, okay, I'm going to call my assistant and just tell her I'm going to be a little late. And she got on the phone and she said, "Bonnie, Eamon just called." I didn't have the radio on, which was unusual. She said, "Bonnie, Eamon just called, and he said a plane has hit the Trade Center, but it's a small plane. Don't worry. He's on his way out. He just wanted you to know that he loves you and loves the children." So he tried to reach me, but we didn't connect. And at that point, I turned the radio on, and as the story unfolded, the way I describe it is, I think I was driving 100 miles an hour down the highway, and when I finally got to my office, it was as if I threw my car, because I left the door open. I just ran up to the third floor where my office was located. And by then, people had a television out, and it was widely known what had happened, that, there was a large plane, and actually a second plane came. But it was the North Tower that was hit first by the American jet, and he was in the North Tower on the 105th floor.
And there were some time where you didn't know if he was alive or not. And I remember reading in the book that you had a lot of people at your house, I think, or you were at a place, and then you screamed out for a sign.
Yeah. I think you never want to give up hope when something tragic happens in your family. I think in my heart, I knew probably that something horrible had occurred, and whatever, but you didn't want to believe that. So I left work with a couple of friends. I came home. Already family was starting to arrive. My friends, Eamon's friends, were coming to the house. And we spent the day just trying to get answers. And a couple of friends from the city said, it doesn't look too good, whatever. But the next morning I got up really early, and, it was just beginning to be light outside. And I went out to the front yard, and since we're here in my house now, you can see. And it was one of those days where it was extremely still. There was not a ripple of wind, not a breeze. And I just yelled out, "Eamon, please tell us where you are," because we had been trying the entire day to find out. We hadn't heard anything from him or any of his friends. And, maybe a couple of seconds passed, and all of a sudden, one of the trees way down on the left of my driveway started to sway back and forth. And I looked up, and, these little squirrels, we have these little animals. I thought maybe it was a bunch of squirrels running around in the tree. And then I saw that it was almost like a river of wind that came and swirled around some of the other trees, and it came across the grass. It was almost had borders to it. You could almost see it like some sort of a science fiction movie where they create this effect. And the way I describe it, I was wearing a skirt and it sort of whimsically played with my skirt and then stopped. I tell you, I have never had an experience like that before. And I guess I viewed that as the answer to the question,
And I think it was another powerful story when you went with a bird.
Yes. In February of 2002, I had been sort of coincidentally at a 9/11 related meeting in a nearby town. And it was a very cold day. It was ice and snow and whatever. Very, very cold, sharp wind blowing. And we were in this little meeting. There were only a few of us in an office. And there was a knock at the door. And it was my pastor from the church I belonged to and the head of our police force. And they told me, you see that and you think, oh my God, what's happened? And they said they had found my husband's remains. And the whole 9/11 experience for most people was very unusual when it came to that, because very few people were found early on. I mean, this was something that in many cases took years and years to really get remains, and some people never did. So, it's a different kind of experience for you. So I left, and the minister was driving me, and he, we were back in the town, and he turned very sharply into this driveway, and I realized it was the driveway into the one major cemetery we have in our town. And he said to me, you've got to start thinking about this now, and I was just sort of in a daze. But right at that moment, and I described the conditions, the weather conditions, this huge bird came out of nowhere and landed in front of our car. And it was what's called a great blue heron, which typically are in warmer climates. You can find them up and down the eastern seaboard of the U.S., but this was very unusual for this huge bird to be in a cemetery in the middle of winter in this kind of environment. And the reason it was also so unusual is because it was the one bird that my husband, my father, and I had a connection with. My parents had a home in Florida, and there was one of these blue herons that used to be out there every morning, and my father had kind of a friendship with it. And one Christmas, my husband bought him a big glass replica of the blue heron. So for me, it was a sign, I guess. And that's the thing, different things happen to different people. It's how you interpret them. Yeah. And many people have signs, but they don't realize that's what they are.
Yeah. So if you can tell a little bit about other people's stories, because it seems like there are some patterns or similar things, like dreams does come up a lot, that people connect with their beloveds through dreams. Do you have any stories you would like to tell?
Dreams are very consistent. Many people feel they've had what's called a visitation within a dream, and they all describe it the same way. They're always in color. They're very vivid. In most cases, the person doesn't talk. Once in a while, there's a few words exchanged, but it's a consistent kind of visual that they have. And in one case, a woman had a dream, and she had been dreaming about her husband, but he always had a very solemn expression on his face. And in this case, this particular dream was very different. It was much more real, and he was smiling. And she, after having that dream, not very long afterwards, woke up, and he was sitting right there, still with the smile. And she knows she was awake. And the very next day, she went down to ground zero, and she was standing in sort of a balcony where she could overlook the grounds. And she noticed in those days, if you remember on television, if they found anything, they would put an American flag over if they found a person, and they would bring it up, and whoever was there, the firemen, the police, would sort of line in a very respectful way, line these wooden planks that you could use to walk out of the area. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is, while she was standing there, she noticed that they were bringing somebody up with the American flag, etc., the way I described it. And later she found out it was her husband. So the night before, she had this dream, and she had the visitation with him smiling. Wow. And the very next day, there he was. So that's one example.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear stories like that, I feel that there's no coincidence.
No, I don't think there's any coincidences either. And I think this is all good. I think it's all positive. It happens to a lot more people than we know, because people are afraid to talk about their experiences. They think they will be judged in a negative way, and it's important, for your viewers, anybody you talk to let them know it's okay to share what they've experienced, because what it does is it reinforces for other people that, if they've had something they thought might be a sign or something, that maybe it really was. And don't despair, because just because a person passes on, they may be gone in the sense of our material, physical world that we live in, but they aren't really gone from your life.
So how long did it take you to write this book? I mean, you have a lot of stories here.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed nearly 200 families and friends of victims, and it took about 5 years from the beginning, because I was working full time, and many times at night I do the interviews, and then I would work transcribing tapes and so forth, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd get up and go to work again. So this was not a healthy way to proceed with this project. So ultimately I went full time on the project, and took a couple more years to finish, and then I just thought it was really important to document this. And, the nice thing is I've gotten so many letters from people from all over the world who've had experiences, and they were so glad to know that so many associated with 9/11 shared theirs. Now they felt comfortable sharing their own. So, I think it was well worth it.
And there was a story here about coins. A lot of people have had stories or signs with coins, and you had as well, because you were doubting that you were going to write this book, I think around 2006, and you were sitting in a restaurant. And that story just blew me off. Yeah. If you can tell that story.
Yeah, well, you may recall when my husband made the comment during the Band of Brothers movie, the not the movie, but the series. It was that particular episode where 1944, June 6th, D-Day, these boys are diving out of the planes. And that was his last conversation with me, telling me, that he knew that he was going to go soon, and that he was no longer afraid. And so that 1944 was really pivotal. It was really important from the context of all the discussions I had with him. It was something that I remembered, and how passionate he was, and compassionate he was, in terms of supporting those young men and what they had to go through, just like anyone in our military today. So I was out to dinner, and I really was thinking to myself, this is crazy what I'm doing. And, I didn't have a publisher at the time. I just didn't, I thought, what am I doing, with this? And I was in a restaurant that you have to sign. You can't use credit cards or anything. So there's no cash exchanged. And we were actually outside, and at a table, and we were the last ones to order, and somebody said, we better order, it's getting late, the kitchen's going to close. So the waiters brought menus and gave them to us, and I was talking to somebody on my right, and I opened my menu, and I had just told the story of Band of Brothers and the whole 1944 conversation, and I looked down, and there was a penny in the middle of my menu, and I could tell it was old, and somebody else saw it, and they said, what is that? I said, it's a penny. And nobody knew. I mean, these waiters were on the other side of the floor. You can't just find these old pennies and stick them in menus. So they gave me the menu and I opened it, and here it was, and it was a 1944 penny. So I knew right then and there, okay, I'll continue with the project. I won't be doubting it any longer. That was really profound.
Yeah, that is really amazing. How this led you to question how these things work, or have you gone deeper into it, into spirituality? I mean, how is it possible that things manifest, or how is it possible that these people knew they were going to die? Do you have any theory or feeling about that?
You know what? I mean, I looked at all sorts of literature. I tried to find a scientific explanation for the premonitions, a scientific explanation for the visitations. So many people have had these visitations. I've never had that experience personally, but enough people have, both associated with 9/11 and not, where they've actually seen their loved one. You could use the term ghost. I don't use that term. I just say spirit. But this has been happening for centuries. And, there are people who doubt and there are people who believe. The difference here is there's nothing scary about the experiences these people have had. It's something that's really a wonderful, wonderful thing for them. So there's a point where you have to say, okay, do we have to understand everything? Because you could spend your entire human life trying to figure this out and get nowhere. Because there are so many things that we don't understand, and it's okay just to say we don't understand it, but it's a good thing. So it's your choice whether to accept it as valid or not. And that's the other thing that, when I wrote the book, it wasn't meant to be a doctrine that I wanted everybody to start believing. It was really just a group of stories reflecting experiences that help these people get through what otherwise would be, and I don't want to take away from it, what otherwise would be an extremely challenging thing. Grief is challenging no matter what. But these experiences, as I said earlier, helped the individuals process what had happened to them and maybe helped make it a little bit easier. So I don't want anyone to believe anything that they don't. That's not the intent. It's just something that you can reflect on and make up your own mind, really.
So is there anything you want to say to other people who have lost loved ones? I know we had a tragic accident in Norway, or incident in Norway, where 88 youth lost their lives. And I just want to say that this book is also in Norwegian. That's where I found it, actually. It's called Budskap. And it's really worth while reading. It gives you so much hope, and there are so many stories here. Is there, I guess it's impossible to say advice, but is there anything you can say to those who have lost people recently, since you've been through it, that can help maybe, or that can, how to deal with grief?
Yes, and this is just my personal belief, but I do believe that when you lose a loved one, they are not gone forever. I do believe that you remain connected to them. So I would say to anybody who's lost someone, you are faced with unimaginable challenges that relate just to you because of your relationship with the individual. And there's so many complexities related to this. But don't be afraid to talk about experiences if something happens that makes you think, could that have been, a sign or a message from the person you lost? It's okay to talk about these things, because once you do, it doesn't matter what culture you're from. I've found sort of a universal understanding of this everywhere I've traveled. Yeah. And because the spiritual world sees no color, sees no culture, the spiritual world is what it is. And it's a positive thing. When you lose a loved one, they are there to help you, to give you support in many different ways that you're not even aware of, if you just are open to it. If you don't believe in this kind of thing, that's fine too. But I think when you're struggling with grief, it's much easier to process what happened and to move on without the feeling that the person is gone forever. That is a very difficult concept for the human mind to wrap itself around. So I think that's really the intent of the book, to provide enough examples, credible examples, to allow someone else to say, could this be happening in my own life? And if it is, how wonderful.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And thank you so much for watching, guys, and much light from Connecticut.